I analyzed 100 games from players rated 1,400 on chess.com to see which mistakes they were making that were costing them the game. I recorded the most common mistakes as well as how long they spent on those mistakes, the game phase that it happened in. So was it in the opening, the middle game, or the end game? And I've got some really interesting takeaways for you guys, which we're going to look at right now. All right, so key takeaway number one, we analyzed which phase of the game these mistakes happened in. And in only 4 games did the mistake happen in the opening. In 53 games, so over half, it was the middle game. And this was interesting, 43% of the time, it was in the end game. So when you get to 1,400, what this is telling me is that not as many people are making mistakes in the middle game. Yes, it's still a high percentage, but it's not as high as it was with 1,200. If you remember, I think it was like 68% of the mistakes happened in the middle game. And that makes sense, right? You have 2 even players, they're doing a good job of kind of not making those blunders, but eventually it does happen, right? And we see a lot of that in the end game. This is an example, okay? This position right here, what would you play as white? Well, if you had a chance to think about that, the move that was played in the game was knight takes c6. Now, it is a blunder, but they had an idea, and their idea was that if black takes like this, they're going to grab the rook, and that's a good trade for them, okay? And then the other idea was that if the rook takes here, which by the way is what was played in the game, they would recapture with that knight and get a fork. Okay, so the problem is they missed this move, bishop takes c6. And what bishop takes c6 does, it gets rid of the knight, and it also defends on e8. And now you're not winning a rook, you just lost your knight for a pawn, which makes no sense, right? But black missed it in the game, blundered, and white ended up going on to win the game. So it worked out for them, but it was a total mistake, okay? But this is an example of kind of the end game. We're out of the middle game here. There's not a lot of pieces left. General rule is if queens are traded and there's not a lot of other pieces, then you're in the end game, okay? And that's what we see here. I just wanted to give you an example of that. Okay, so quite a few, 43% of the games, the mistake actually happened at the end. All right, key takeaway number 2. Now, for key takeaway number 2, we looked at blunders versus tactics, and I counted up how many times the games had blunders and how many times they had tactics mistakes, okay? So in 115 times out of these 100 games, there was multiple in some games, there were significant blunders. When we say blunder, we just mean obvious, didn't see that a piece could get captured, just super basic, just you shouldn't do that, it's a blunder. Versus tactics, which came up in 96 times, which is a bit more complicated. So let me show you an example. This is the position. Black played the move knight here, and white totally didn't notice the queen and just played this move and lost the queen. Okay, they could have sacrificed the rook, would have been one option, and the game goes on. They could have even tried rook b1, going for the pin here would have been another option, but they just blundered the queen, right? That's very basic, okay? Compare that to this position. It's black's turn, and black plays the move. Sorry, it's white's turn. King h5. Now it's black's turn. Apologize for that. And black plays the move rook to h1. Okay, this is a huge blunder because if you notice, this bishop is lined up on a dark square with the king. And so all white has to do is take here with the check, unleash the bishop, and there's a discovered attack which is going to hit the rook. Okay, so this was a bit more advanced, but it was a tactic that was kind of lurking there. And yeah, black just ended up losing the game. Now, the interesting thing is black actually had a really nice move in this position. If you would like to pause, what could black have played instead of that? Well, the move is actually sacrificing the bishop with check first, because now if the pawn takes, guess what? This actually just leads to checkmate. This is just game over, okay? So they had the right idea of bringing the rook there, but they didn't notice this tactic of check, check, and then they lose their rook, okay? So you see the difference. Some of the mistakes are just obvious blunders. Other ones like this, it's a bit more involved. It's a tactic that they missed, but it wasn't like super obvious, okay? About half, a little bit more on the blunder side there, all right? Let's go to key takeaway number 3. So we checked how often did the mistake happen and it was because they moved too fast, okay? And so you can see here, 800, 58% of the time, that was the reason. In 1,000, 44% of the time. In 1,200, only 40%. And at 1,400, only 36 out of these 100 games had that happen. So we're still seeing that trend go down, where players are getting better at using their time, at slowing down, at not making blunders simply because they moved in 2 seconds and didn't even think, okay? And I imagine I didn't analyze any further, but I imagine if we would have went to 16, 1800, 2000, we would see even less and less mistakes that just happened because they just didn't think. Okay, that's a critical aspect of this. You have to use your time, do a proper blunder check. Okay. All right, so key takeaway number 4, we analyzed the types of blunders that these players were making. And I categorized the top 3 that I'm going to share with you right now. So number 3 on the types of blunders happening in 28 out of these 100 games were something related to a rook. Okay, a rook blunder of some kind. So in this position, it's black's turn. What would you play in this position? All right, well, the move that was played in the game was knight to e4, and it's a big mistake because you leave the rook undefended now. The knight was defending, no, now it's no longer defending. White can simply take that, and they go on to win the game relatively easily, okay? So the best move was actually queen to f7, and yes, white's attacking over here, but black had the right idea of launching a counterattack. They just needed to make sure that their rook wasn't going to get captured. And so what queen f7 does is defends the rook, also starts to put pressure here so that, for example, after something like queen takes b6, now you can jump in with the knight. You're not losing your rook. And look at this fork. White's now in trouble, right? Because when you save your rook, the queen comes in, and this is just checkmate. Okay, so black had the right idea, just missed the detail about losing the rook. Okay, and this is very common actually at this rating range, 1400. Lots of players had the right ideas, they just missed a little detail about it. For example, the idea of like going on the offensive with knight to e4, very smart, makes a lot of sense. They just forgot about the fact that they're losing the rook, right? So it's really critical that not only do you think about those ideas, you don't forget about the pieces that you're blundering, right? That's even more important, okay? Let's look at the next example here. Number 2 on our list of types of blunders is that they didn't see a piece, okay? So in this position, it's black's turn. What move would you play as black? Well, in the game, they decided to play knight to e5, and they didn't notice or didn't see this bishop on g3, which is just a free piece. And white simply took it, and you can't do that at the 1400 level and expect to win very many games, right? You have to make sure you're paying a little more attention to the pieces like that. Okay, so a good move would have been maybe trading that knight for the bishop would have been fine, or even jumping the knight over here to attack the queen would have been fine. I mean, black has a pretty nice position. It's relatively equal, but lots of things they could have done as long as they just didn't blunder the piece. Okay, now number 1 on our list of the most common type of blunder was missing checkmate. Okay, this was either they had a checkmate that they could have done, or they allowed themselves to get checkmated. Okay, so here's an example. It's white's turn. What would you play as white here? All right, if you had a chance to think about that, the move that this person played was capturing the pawn. Now, it doesn't look like a totally crazy move. I mean, you're taking a pawn. It's with tempo on the queen. You're unleashing your bishop here. You're clearing the square for the knight. I mean, it's got a lot of good things about it. The problem is they missed bishop c5 check. And look at their king. Their king is totally stuck. The only thing that you can do is block with the rook. And then this happens, and you have to sacrifice, because if you move, you get checkmated. So you end up losing basically all your pieces, a rook and a queen for a bishop, and you lose the game. So what should they have done instead? Well, they had to recognize that their king was in serious danger. There's a rook here. There's a bishop here. This is a big deal. You have to, be aware of how safe is your king when you play chess, right? And so the best move was queen e3. Why was queen e3 the best move? Well, it stops bishop c5. It gains control of that diagonal, so black can't just checkmate you, right? That's it. If you do that, white's now in a winning position. Okay, now it's still tricky, and there's a lot of ways that it could go wrong, but at least temporarily, white's back in the driver's seat, and they're going to have their own threats that black has to deal with. So just have to pay attention to your king. Okay, you can't get checkmated, and that's the most common thing that we saw in 43 games. Some sort of a checkmate. And it didn't always have to be one move, right? Like this was a little bit more involved, but it basically was either going to lead to a checkmate or you just lose your pieces. But the primary problem was this checkmate threat over here, right, with the rook coming down. Okay, hope that makes sense. Let's go to key takeaway number 5. All right, so key takeaway number 5, we analyzed the types of tactics that were happening most often, where the mistakes were. And coming in at number 4 in 13 out of these 100 games was the discovered attack. All right, so let's take a look. This is the position, and Black played the move e5. It's now your turn as white. What move do you play? Well, in the game, the person decided to play bishop takes e5, thinking it's a free pawn, but they failed to realize that when black pushed the pawn forward, it created the discovered attack. Okay, the rook was actually attacking. They didn't see that, and so they end up just losing their rook for free and the game. So these are some of the trickiest types of tactics, because if all you look at was this particular piece and where it moved to, you kind of can forget about the fact that, well, it was blocking a file or a diagonal or something, right? That's why these are tricky, and you have to watch out for that. Okay, so that's number 4. Oh, and by the way, the best move here for white was probably to go ahead and trade, grab the pawn, and then at least you're going to get another pawn, and it's still a tricky position. It's probably better for black because they have the rook, but white does have some pawns, and if you can somehow capture this with your king and start pushing these guys, who knows what might happen, right? All right, number 3 on the types of tactics in 18 games out of 100 was the pin tactic. Okay, so in this position, black has played here. White plays the move queen to a4. What move do you play as black? You got a chance to look at that. The move that was played in the game was rook to c8. Seems like a very logical, natural move, but it's a big mistake because they failed to realize bishop a3 was a threat. Now the knight is pinned and black has no good way to defend it. You could temporarily hold on with rook to c4, but it's pretty wild. Basically, you could sack the queen here because it's still a good trade for you. Okay, so something like this, right? And white's just coming out up a piece. But not recognizing that there was a pin here, and that's what caused black the problem. So what should they have done instead? Just moving the bishop, because right now black's problem is you've got a lot of things that you need to deal with. Your bishop is under attack. If the knight gets chased away, then you're going to lose the bishop, so you kind of want to deal with that. But you also have this pin that you need to watch out for. So the best way to deal with everything is bishop to b7, because now your bishop's no longer being attacked. And if white tries to do the same thing, you now have this move a5, which sort of saves the day for black, because it's not really that dangerous. Worst case, they take you. It's just a trade, and the game goes on, right? So that's what black needed to realize, but they failed to notice the pin, and they ended up losing the piece. Okay? Let's move on to number 2 on our list. The second most common tactic is created a hanging piece. Okay, that's when the move that you made created a problem. Okay, so it's this position. Black has just played king b8. What move would you play here as white? Well, in the game, they played knight to d7, and they created a weakness here with the rook, right? The rook was defended before, but as soon as you go there and block the rook, it's no longer defended. Now you just lose the rook for free, okay? And even though you take here, it's not as good as obviously the rook, and so it's just not a good trade for white. So what should they have done instead? Just simply capturing here, kicking the knight away, because once that knight goes away, for example, now the rooks can basically just finish off the job, right? There's actually, let me get to a good moment here. Right here, there's checkmate in 4 moves. If you want to work on your tactics a little bit, how do you checkmate in 4 moves? Well, this is a really tricky one, actually. The move is rook to c6, and basically what you're doing is threatening checkmate here, okay? And you needed this rook to guard the c square, the c8 square. So you're clearing the way for this rook to come and deliver the checkmate here on the king, because the knight's controlling here, this rook's controlling here. If you get that rook there, it's just checkmate. Okay, and so the only thing black can do is delay a few moves by going here. You just take it, then they go here, you just take it, and then they can't stop it. Next move, it's checkmate. Okay, so interesting position there. But the key takeaway is you can't create those weaknesses with your move. You have to watch out for stuff like this. Okay, number 1 on our list is, no surprise here, the fork, happening in 45 out of the 100 game, a fork tactic. Okay, but this was a little interesting one, I thought, so I wanted to share this with you guys. So it's black's turn. They take here. What move do you play as white? Well, you only have 2 options. You either take with the king or you take with the queen. And this person decided to take with the king and got forked. Queen to d6. And so forks don't always have to happen with knights, right? Here's an example of a queen fork. And you say, but that's not a big deal, Nelson. He just goes to bishop d5 and he's fine. But now it's a pin and c6 wins the bishop. Okay, so you're seeing now how the tactics are overlapping. You have a fork, but also a pin. And it all happened because they decided to expose their king when they really didn't need to. Okay, if you take with the queen here, there's no fork. Game goes on. It's still pretty equal, but you don't lose your piece, and white is fine. Okay, so just a different example. Forks are not always with the knights. There are other situations like we just saw here. Okay, those are the mistakes, guys. I hope this helped you avoid some of these in your games if you're 1400. And while we're talking about 1400, Breaking 1500 is open right now. If you're stuck at 1400 and you're not sure what to do, Breaking 1500 is probably going to fill in the gaps that you need to get past 1500. I'm super excited. And yeah, there's a lot of people already in there that are learning and having a great time. And so if you want to join that, it's open until Friday. By the way, once you buy the course, you have lifetime access. So enrollment closes on Friday, but you can take as much time as you need to go through the course. So a lot of people were asking that question. So I just want to make sure that I clarified that. All right, guys, thank you. And I'll see you next time. Stay sharp, play smart, and take care.